Hi, my name is Ashley Rourke, and I'm going to discuss birthing location. Is home birth unsafe? Some background information about my project. In the United States, home births account for 1.26% of all births, but this is not the case in many other countries such as the Netherlands. Their home birth rate is 16.3% of all births. A pretty big difference, right? So researchers are hoping to determine the risk of home birth versus hospital birth, and if the attendant, like a midwife or an obstetrician, affects the outcome of the birth. According to the research that I've conducted, geographical location, US versus Netherlands, does affect the outcome of home births. I chose this research topic because I hope to be a labor and delivery nurse. I'm very interested in births and midwifery and women. The clinical problem. So the clinical problem is the safety of home births compared to hospital births. Which has better outcomes, perinatal outcomes. Um, Researchers are attempting to determine if home birth is a safe option for low-risk women in several countries. Researchers are also determining the intervention rate in home versus hospital birth. The PICO question. So my PICO question is, how would infant mortality and post-birth complication rates improve if more patients chose hospital deliveries with doctors instead of home births with unlicensed midwives? The population, patient, or problem. So my population here are pregnant patients. I've specifically only looked at Japan, Iceland, the Netherlands, and Canada. The intervention, I was considering home birth for low risk women, intervention rates, and type of attendant, midwife or obstetrician. The comparison with the intervention is hospital births, intervention rate, and type of attendant, and the outcome here. So from the research I've conducted, they have determined that it is safe for low risk women to birth at home with a midwife attending. There are lower intervention rates in home births, and this finding is geographically dependent on the countries identified above. So I can only speak about Japan, Iceland, the Netherlands, and Canada, but I cannot speak for countries such as the United States. So the search strategy that I used Notre Dame school research databases. I narrowed down the subject category to nursing, and then I chose the CINAHL Plus database with full text. I used a lot of different search terms to try to find these articles, such as midwife, birth outcome, home versus hospital birth, birthing attendant, and outcome. All of the studies that I found pertaining to this topic are from outside of the United States. So a summary of the evidence. As I've said previously, planned home birth for low-risk women is as safe as planned hospital birth. However, there's a caveat to that. There is a higher perinatal mortality rate observed in planned home births. That was one study that found this to be the case. And this study by Hutton et al. Said, compared with planned hospital birth, planned home birth attended by midwives in a jurisdiction where home birth is well integrated into the healthcare system was not associated with a difference in serious adverse neonatal outcomes. Intervention rates for planned home births are lower. This includes oxytocin augmentation, epidural analgesia, and postpartum hemorrhage. And then midwife-led primary care for both home and hospital birth is not associated with an increased risk of adverse perinatal outcomes in Japan. There's some more evidence that I needed to summarize here. Um, as I've said previously, results of birthing outcomes seem to be geographically dependent. Studies conducted in the United States have found an increased risk of home birth. This one source says inconsistent results from the United States, ranging from mild benefits to elevated risk for serious neonatal morbidity and home birth, may reflect lack of regulation and integration within the healthcare system. I did a little bit more digging on what that source meant by lack of regulation and integration within the healthcare system, and I found that this can be attributed to the wide range of midwife education in the United States. So there's different licenses for midwives depending on which state you're in, and there are certain states have stricter requirements for midwives. Um, so you can be a midwife without being a nurse first in some states, and in other states you need to be a nurse before you can be a midwife. Um, so this says educational certification and practical experience may also vary widely, including legislation in some states that make it illegal to provide home birth services, um, whereas other countries have a more regulated midwifery certification throughout the entire country. In the United States, we do not have that. So to answer my PICO question, once again, I'll read the question. How would infant mortality and post-birth complication rates improve if more patients chose hospital deliveries with doctors instead of home births with unlicensed midwives? And I said, based on the research, home birth delivery is safe for low-risk women attended by a midwife in Japan, the Netherlands, Iceland, and Canada. Intervention rates are lower for women giving birth at home. I didn't specifically find information about unlicensed midwives' birthing outcomes because other countries have more uniform criteria and license for midwives. And I didn't find any studies regarding that in the United States. So I guess the answer to my PICO question is they wouldn't necessarily, the infant mortality and post-birth complication rates would not necessarily improve if more patients chose hospital deliveries, because in those countries it is deemed relatively safe for low-risk women to birth at home. How to improve practice. This is a little challenging because there's many different countries and many different variables here, but this data could be used to encourage more low-risk women to birth at home in the country studied. I wouldn't necessarily say that that would improve practice in the United States. It could also be used to show evidence that universal midwife certifications are necessary in the United States. As I've said before, many states allow direct entry midwives and certified nurse midwives to practice equally, but we all know that just because you have a direct entry midwife without a prior nursing degree does not mean that you have the same experiences or qualifications that someone as a nurse would have first before becoming a midwife. Here's a list of all my references. Um, you'll see all of the studies mentioned um, in the various countries: Iceland, Japan,